This is PhantomElectricGhost, and we are live on our Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube channels with Cabotage KSM from Argentina, right?
Yes.
And
Hello.
with the first time we have you, and you got your guitar there, and you do visual work and you do really interesting audio work, and we actually have one of your videos queued up. But before we get into that, we do have to talk up our sponsor. So we are sponsored by Double Jack Online. They're a philanthropic online lottery. So if you take your cell phone right now and you scan that code, you can try Double Jack Online. They do online Keno and Powerball, and a percentage of the profits go to charity. So again, take your smartphone, scan that, and try it out. If you do get into it, you can become an affiliate, and you get earn money from everybody that plays. So it's a pretty cool deal if you're into it. You want a passive income. It's a cool thing to get into. So we're gonna bring up your video. We got it
Okay.
queued up, and this is make sure I got it. Is Basilica?
Basilica. Yes.
Basilica. And so, yeah, we're gonna maybe talk about the video on the backside of it, but we're gonna play it, put you on mute, and then we'll talk and do a full kind of behind the music type of interview. But we're gonna get into that video right now.
Perfect.
So we're back on the air. Are you still
Okay.
there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello? You still there? Can you hear me?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Are you there?
I'm here.
Yeah. So maybe you can talk about the video a little bit, and the type of visual work you did. I mean, that's one example.
Okay. In this case, I'm using footage, an old footage of archives.
Mm-hmm.
Archive.org. It have a material that I think is it has no copyright issues, but they are
Okay.
beautiful. So,
Yeah.
uh, and well, I managed to mix it with this music. I think they go well together.
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty interesting because those are like model train footage, right? Those are all. I'm a child of the '70s, and my older brother, he had a really awesome train set in my basement, and it like took the whole basement, and he had
Cool.
all the switches, and it was just kind of reminds me of like because the old Lionel train sets that were very intricate, and you had like switching, you can get smoke coming out of them, you can. There was a lot of interesting things because we didn't have like the internet, we had to play with like
Yes,
Lego train sets or slot
we
cars or
had
something.
fun with another things.
Yeah, yeah. So you had to have imagination of what was going to happen with your stuff, and not like just
Yes,
playing some video game
totally.
that was kind of
But
silly.
I had video games when I was very child.
Mhm.
I had a Commodore, but the video games were different.
Yeah, they're more simple. I mean, I grew up like
Yeah,
with the Atari 600, 2600. It was like not realistic, not like what you see
but
on a PlayStation
you
or an
could
Xbox.
spend hours anywhere, anyway.
Yeah, but maybe talk more about like the music behind the video, and we'll get into your actual sound, which you've actually got like a name for your musical style. Maybe you talk about the name that you've come up with for your type of genre.
It's a mix of different genres.
Hmm.
Um,
So
I
you
think
call it
it's
Limatronic.
Limatroniq. Yes.
Maybe you can
Um,
tell people what does that mean, what does it stand for.
where um, Lima could be many things. I think it is a fruit, the lime,
Hmm.
and it's a tool to lime. Is the name, and is the capital of Peru,
Oh, because you got
Lima,
multiple meanings. But I was just wondering how
and
you wanted people
and,
to think about it.
and because it's a tool, it is named Lima to certain neurological breakdown, and it's an Argentinian term. Lima is
Mm.
like burnt out or something like that.
Oh, okay. That's yeah. For people who don't know, that's interesting. That's probably what we need to kind of get out of it, like what you're trying to convey, or maybe you want the audience to kind of figure it out. But
Yes,
yeah, I
I
just
like that,
wondered.
that it
Yeah,
means many things.
yeah. So you had a multiple meaning term, and it kind of want the audience to kind of take whatever when they listen to your music, maybe they can kind of get the feel of what it is.
But is the word electronic there?
Hmm.
Always there's some uh, keyboards or synthetic sound. But I also like old guitar.
Yeah, because you got your guitar there, so maybe you want to show us a little bit of anything you think you think you want to put down so people can kind of hear your sound.
Yeah, and I want to release this album. I will show you.
Oh,
This is
that's the
the
new album.
cover, and I think this song will be there. And this is bass relief,
Hmm.
like the technique, but I always play with the word bass. So I put two S, and many songs are bass something
Yeah, yeah. So
because
that's just
I
something
yes,
that part of your whole motif of what you want to do. You're using language that has multiple meanings and things like that.
pulse depends.
So
Yes,
like yeah, yeah. So I mean, is there anything you want to kind of maybe play a little bit on your guitar that's representative of what's gonna be on the record?
well, the record has a lot of synthetic sounds, so I don't uh, know right now some guitar part.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know you brought the guitar, so I didn't know if you wanted to like show
And,
something.
and the amp is not sounding. Okay, no views.
Oh, it's back. There you go. I hear it.
It's back.
Yeah, I hear it. So I mean,
Well,
we can get into like I like to ask people like when they first get in to the interview, like what age did you get into music? And when did you decide that you wanted to actually, be a musician?
I started playing guitar when I was 11, and I was not good when I started, as you can imagine. And I didn't think that music was my thing. I'm more into drawing and illustration. This is a
That's one of your
pandemic.
art. That's your art.
Yes, or here.
Hmm.
I
So what
I
when so how did you decide that you get the confidence that if you're more of a visual artist, but then you started getting into music, when did you feel that you started to take it
I
serious and you
like everyone. I learned licks from the people I admire,
hmm
and you are learning more things. And maybe 2 years later, I I was like that.
okay, yeah, so it's like a lot of so maybe I
This
always
is
ask
me.
people like who were your influences, who did you like who did you listen to and maybe learn guitar from, what were the type of who were the musicians that you really looked up to?
Um, at that time, I like classic rock, like Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix,
Hmm.
um, and I think my very beginnings in the guitar is all that kind of music.
Like blues based rock, like a blues based rock, like
That
the
that is
American kind of rock blues or British rock blues. Yeah, that's cool. I'm a big Hendrix fan. You had a little bit
everyone
of a
is,
You had a little Hendrixian lick going there for a second.
and I learned from him this double stop thing that
Yeah, that's awesome.
Frusciante always, or many others. Um, then I started to to listen to a lot of music like The Cure.
The
I
Cure.
like the
Also, that's
way,
where you got new wave. Like you got into new wave, new romantic,
yeah,
and like '80s synth pop.
Depeche Mode.
Yeah, Depeche Mode. And what do you think about like New Order, Joy Division?
Yes, they were the
Yeah, yeah,
inspirators.
yeah. Because you can
Yeah,
see I'm a synthesizer guy. See all
I
my synths
I
back
know it.
there. And I was like, I'm 54, so I grew up like right when Joy Division showed up on MTV, right? And I saw like their first video was like one of the first videos on MTV.
From the beginning.
Yeah, and I just like, oh, and then I started looking into pawn shops to find like synths, to go find like try to find an ARP Odyssey, go find like a Mini Moog, go find like a Roland like D50. Like I was, and then I started saying, I love Duran Duran, like I like The Cure. I said, well, I want to, I was gonna get a guitar, but then I said everybody in my band had a guitar, and I'm like, well, what would I do? I
You
said, well,
needed to.
I should get a keyboard, because then I can be like these Duran Duran. I could be like The Cure.
Yes. um, I like the way Robert Smith add like
Robert Smith,
layers of melodies, like um,
yeah, yeah. That's what's interesting about synth pop is people forget that there's a lot of guitar in it. A lot of '80s music
yes,
has the synthesizer, but there's a lot of really interesting rhythmic guitar that's in like Joy Division and New Order and The Cure. They always get criticized by some people saying, "Oh, those are synth pop bands," but there's a lot of guitar and bass
Yes,
work, and a lot of it is like funk. There's a lot of funk bass
it's
kind of.
in this song. There's a lot of fun. Yes,
Yeah,
and
it's interesting. People.
then he keeps adding some more things like
Yeah, just the layering on it is really interesting because you get a lot of rhythmic like repetition, but then there's the cool layering. But it's got the groove. It's kind of groove. It's not disco. It's new wave.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's really cool that you're really bringing out what I've always told some people. Like there are a lot of the like even Duran Duran. If you listen to Duran Duran, they got criticized being like a teeny bopper kind of '80s video band, but they actually have a lot of interesting guitar parts on their songs.
Yes,
Uh, and Nick
yes,
Rhodes did really cool work on the Jupiter 8. Like the Roland Jupiter 8 is Duran Duran's kind of famous for using the Jupiter. And the way they used the Jupiter, he's totally underrated in terms of the way that he used the Jupiter 8. People look at like bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Tony Banks from Genesis and stuff, and the guys from Yes, and Pink Floyd, but there's a
yes.
lot of cool work in some of these '80s bands that I think people are starting to
For sure.
recognize that a lot of the new romantic music is actually
See,
pretty significant.
there's some rock in there too.
Yeah.
Robert Smith is a fan of Hendrix too, and in some way is there. But I also had cassettes of Vangelis and the classic electronic musicians like Jean-Michel Jarre.
hmm Yeah, I was
And
really into Kraftwerk because I think the German band Kraftwerk because they really got me heavy into keyboards. Besides like listening to like Tony Banks on Genesis and Emerson, Keith Emerson, I used to listen to him. I still listen to him a lot.
I think
But I also listen.
Emerson
Yeah.
worked with Roger Moore. Roger
hmm
Moore.
Yeah.
They
That's
worked
pretty cool.
together. He was ahead.
But the other thing that's really interesting is like I find that Pete Townsend, as a guitar player, he did very interesting things with like the ARP 2500 and ARP 2600, and it's
With
interesting
the Who.
sometimes that Pete Townsend from the Who, he did really good
I
like
didn't know that.
synthesizer. Yeah, if you listen to like Barbara O'Reilly and you listen to like Who Are
Yes,
You, there's a lot
I
of interesting. Uses like the envelope follower in the ARP 2500,
well,
2600 with his guitar. He actually took his guitar and plugged it into the synth and used the envelope follower to create like a synth repetitive
wow,
line. And it's very
incredible.
significant because it's like okay, like a guitar player can sometimes approach like a synthesizer in a different way than somebody who's trained on the keyboards because like you might say, well, why wouldn't I just try this, right? So he tried something that keyboard players maybe wouldn't have tried because they weren't coming from it from a guitar
Totally.
perspective. So do you find that like that playing the synths and the guitar that you can take some of your techniques from
Yes,
guitar and use them on the synth?
I have this triple play by Fishman. So
hmm
if I turn the volume down, I can play just the.
Oh, that's nice.
Uh, yes, but I use a lot the piano roll. I like
hmm
to program things too, but it's true that the guitar gives you some different perspective about electronic sounds.
Yeah,
Uh,
because I'm actually a wind player. I started on a clarinet, and I try to take like wind techniques and use them on synths. And the idea is like if you're a wind player, right? You have your breath, right? You can't keep on doing a line because you have to breathe, right? So
yes,
if you take some of the fact that if you play like a line like a horn player or a wind player would, which means you would take breaths, that you would actually make introduce
yes,
that and not just keep on playing because you can, but introduce like the dynamic of, oh, like I could use my reed in a certain way, right? I could do my
uh,
breath control in a certain way. If I bring
uh,
that to a Moog,
that
and when I
there's
play a
some
Moog,
devices,
yeah,
MIDI
yeah, you can,
devices that convert the press.
yeah, you
I
can
like.
convert it, yeah, too.
They have a lot of expression
Yeah, it's the
in,
expression
in
of a
every
wind
note.
player. Yeah, because I think Hendrix sometimes seemed to take Coltrane, like John Coltrane type phrasing, and use it in his lines. That you can
Yes,
kind
it's
of hear some jazz, like saxophone, baritone sax kind of style in some of Hendrixian work. That they somehow picked it up, and does phrasing similar to what a horn would do. And I just think it's interesting when you take dynamics from other instruments and then use them. And that's what's cool. I think as a synthesizer player, one of the things I love to do is like, okay, if I'm going to play violins, I should actually try to play like a cello or a violin. I should listen to that music and try to find the dynamics
yeah,
and and do that.
yeah. It's interesting to hear other aspects like trying to get us sax lick,
Hmm.
or trying to bring to other field things from another field and bring it
Yeah. I think it's
to
like
the ones.
experimentation. I think that's what like interesting. I love to talk to musicians that are doing like experimental work, kind of like I love like Brian Eno. I liked
And
like what Lou Reed used to do with the Velvet Underground, the stuff that they were doing with Andy Warhol was this idea of
Daniel,
like mixing art with music,
yes, totally. Daniel Lanois is very good.
Yeah, yeah, I love
Work,
his work. He does a
work,
lot of interesting work with U2, like U2 and Brian Eno. They worked on like
yes,
like
to
a bunch of
Astral
projects.
Baby.
Yeah, it's just
Yes,
it's like I love the what Eno did with Bowie in the '70s in Berlin. Like Eno did a lot of weird experimentation. Like there's a story one time that he had all the musicians in a room and he went on a chalkboard and he just started mixing chord progressions and saying just do this. And he just would randomly go and put it up on the board and say, well, why? And he said, well,
with
just
that
because I said just try it.
before PCs.
Yeah, he would just randomly do stuff and introduce all kinds of devices and just
Yes,
kind of from a very art school kind of attitude. It's like, oh, I'm going to try this, try that, like try to break it, change something around just to see what would happen. Like I
yes.
think I heard a story one time. Peter Gabriel had a drummer do a bunch of takes, and then he took the tape and he cut it. He spliced the tape and then rearranged the whole drum part just
Collage.
by yeah, it just did a collage and just moved it all around and said, well, that's it. That's the part.
That's the part. Yes, it's like not trying to do the same again and again. I think part of this is to find something new, not because it will be the greatest thing. Just if you don't, you get bored. I think.
Yeah, I mean, so do you when you record, do you use like the modern technology of using like a digital audio workstation, or do you do like hardware recording, or do you go to a studio? What's your technique for recording?
I'm use Ubuntu Studio. I like all the free software thing,
Hmm.
and I use Bitwig, which is not free, but is but it runs under Linux.
Hmm.
And yes, I love to use other things like tape, but I don't have those things. I
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
have the PC that is the one I have, but I don't think it's the best tool to make music.
Yeah, I've been playing with a lot of different things. Like I got like hardware recorders. I like to use like a Zoom R24,
Yes,
um, because then I can just like do whatever I want. I don't get like sometimes I find within a DAW that I would do something, and then when I go into my FL Studio, for example, and I did something on my Moog, and then when I actually run it, it actually changed it. And then I'm like, well, I don't want it changing what I just went and spent all this time on my Moog doing all this CV
but
like programming, and then when I recorded it into the DAW, like it didn't take it. It doesn't sound like what I heard coming out of the direct instrument. So I started using things like R24s and Tascam 20s and stuff like that because I found that I was able to get exactly what I heard.
yes,
Um,
another thing about that recorders like the Zoom is that you have it's more physical.
yeah, yeah, I like
The
the
sound is
physical.
more abstract. I don't know.
Yeah, because I
I
grew up on I used a Tascam 4 tracker back in the 80s. I had a
yes.
Roland D50 that I repaired. It was messed up, and then I found it in a pawn shop, and I had it with a chord sequencer and a Tascam 4 tracker. And I would just sequence things on the D50 through the chord sequencer and then put them down on a 4 track cassette and to just do it that way. And I just loved recording that way. And so even when DAWs came, I was more drawn to like R16s and R24s and
Yeah,
Tascam 20s because I like the hands-on sliders and all the,
totally.
even if I have to punch in and punch out, I rather punch in and punch out on a device like that than to go onto the
Yes,
grid.
not with
It's
have
just like
with a mouse.
yeah, I don't know. I like being at the instrument because if I'm at my instrument and I have my hardware recorder and I suddenly want to do something, I can just go do it. I don't have to go onto the computer. I can just go
Yeah,
on to with all my boards. So I just have all my boards like an old school, like Tony Banks or any
yeah,
other guys. I have all these boards just stacked up, and I just okay, I'm just gonna do something on a board.
totally. I had a Fostex, I think, and
Oh, that's a
another
nice
brand
one.
of
Yeah, that was back in the
Fostex.
day. I had one.
I was horrible at that time, but I like it, the experience of Porta Studios, and you can play with the speed of the tape,
Yeah, the tape. Yeah, I
and you
mean, playing
can
with the speed of the tape is kind of like an old school thing. I mean, Prince used to do that to create like his characters. Like he used to create this character Bob George. He created this character Camille, and he would use it by the analog tape and actually speed up the tape. And there's something about like even Funkadelic Sir knows. Like if you think about like George Clinton, he used to do a lot of experiments with his voice without vocoders. Just using the analog tape speed to do it.
well,
And there's a difference in how it sounds compared to like a vocoder. When you do it on the analog tape, it does sound different. It doesn't sound the same.
yes, it's another thing.
So
I
so
think.
when you yeah,
Tell me.
go ahead.
No, I think the Beatles recorded some part that it was too fast to play, and they played an octave lower,
And then George Martin sped it up.
slower. Yeah,
Yeah, he's like the fifth
yeah,
Beatle. Like,
the fifth
yeah,
fiddle. Okay.
yeah. And what George Martin is so important to the Beatles because they probably would have just kept on sounding like Help, and when they met him, I was watching this documentary, and he was saying like I could have recorded the Beatles like they sounded in Berlin, and they could have just kept on sounding like that, right? But we decided that I was going to take some techniques. Like he had been working on Peter Sellers, the comedian. Peter Sellers, like George Martin, used to do these comedy records, and on the
Yeah,
comedy records, he had orchestras, he had all kinds of effects, he had all kinds of overdubs, he had these full production techniques. And then what he came to find out in this documentary is the guys in the Beatles, they liked what he was doing on those Peter Sellers records, right? And then one day they're like, well, what if we take some of those techniques that you do for the comedy
Well,
records and use them on a record? And George was saying, yeah, because like you can use the studio like a sound painting. And he brought up the term sound painting, and he said, like,
okay.
I can actually use the studio like an instrument, and I can do something in the studio that maybe I can't do live. Maybe the Beatles could never replicate that live, but the studio, we can actually make a version of the Beatles that is kind of like in this different reality, right? Which is
Totally.
where you get
They
Sergeant Pepper. Yeah, and then Sergeant Pepper kind of inspires everybody in the 60s and 70s to say, hey, yeah, you can use the studio. And even today, like in your DAW, you can do things that maybe physically you couldn't do on stage using those type of
yes,
techniques.
I like bands like Radiohead.
Yeah,
Radiohead.
Radiohead's awesome.
If you listen to In Rainbows, you think that they can play that live, and they can play it live. I think there's
Well,
they
they're
talk.
amazing. They,
Yeah,
they
but it's not common that they can do an album that sounds that it only can be played in a studio, and they can play it live, but it's not easy to
No,
achieve.
no, they're just like when you see them like playing, they're like totally like avant-garde experimental guys. I see them on the modular synths, like programming them on stage, like
Yeah,
actually, and able to replicate. Like you said, like not a lot of bands could do that. There's some bands that like they probably just run it off of Ableton, you know.
play.
But Radiohead will actually go and on their modulars and on all their gear and actually do it. Right,
Yeah,
where other bands would just take the track and
yeah,
run it off of the computer and maybe overdub like play a live guitar line and a live drum line, but a lot of the stuff would just be backing
yes.
tracks that they already did, right, and just run it through the computer.
I don't have a modular, but I think it is very hard to replicate what you have in your home, and if you take the modular to another place, then the temperature is not the same. The
Oh yeah, modulars
yes,
don't act the same. I kind of
good.
live with it. Like with my stuff is like I live with the fact that if I go play, it's not going to be exactly what I did. And if I do want to make it exact, I kind of do a Nine Inch Nails thing. Nine Inch Nails are famous for taking their Tascams or their Zoom. They actually take their hardware recorders and they run them. They actually run the tape. They run the digital tape, and they
The same
then
thing.
yeah, they will go in like it's kind of, but it's cool about it is they would take it and then run it through some pedals or run it through
Yeah,
effects, and so then they'll modify it because they're running it through loopers live. So they'll take their original track, and one of their guys is like a genius engineer, and he goes on stage and he has all these recorders running through effects and loopers and stuff,
yeah,
and he manually still plays it. Even though it's on tape, he still changes. He
yeah.
can change.
45 is
Yeah, he can change it. Like if he
true.
feels like it, like, oh, I'm going to loop this part, and then I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to go run it through a delay, and then run it through a
Really
phaser,
cool.
and then run it through this, and he just like whatever he feels like, he just does it, you know. But it sounds like amazing because it's not like fully canned. It's actually still a performance. It's still like an art
Yes, totally.
performance.
It's not playback.
Yeah, it's actually being manipulated, so it's actually still feels like there's a musician who has their hands on it, right? And that's what I love about musicians that feel like they should be involved rather than like I think there's a difference between a DJ and a musician, right? Not that a DJ isn't a musician. Maybe when they wrote their piece, they were writing it. But when you go on stage with a CDJ and you just push the button, and then you're kind of jumping up and down. It's like not the same as if
Yes,
you're playing your guitar or if you're playing a keyboard or if you're playing a bass.
there
It's a
are
different thing. It's a different thing.
a great song where DJs sometimes makes something of music or something of live performance, and or totally DJ that only play records to electronic musician, and there's some gray zone in between where some DJs do some music live.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, today they have tools. Cause I got like an Akai Force. Like the
Yeah,
Kai Force lets you actually play pads, right? So you can actually have your soft synths on it. So like even if you have an MPC, if you have an MPC on stage versus a
yeah,
CDJ, like if you're running like a MIDI controller on top of your CDJ,
yeah,
then I've seen DJs introduce like modular, run in their modular, right? So they could have a mode modular and they could be kicking off like clips from the modular like CV like
yeah,
and so they have their stuff that's on their CDJ, but then they also have a controller that's kicking off modular synths at the same time. But
yeah,
what I'm kind of like not as excited about is if when I see a guy that has a CDJ with no other controllers and just running like what was already pre-recorded and not really changing it, that's where I don't really dig that so much. I'm more into like real performance. As long as they mix it up and scratch or do whatever they're gonna do. But if they just hit the button and then jump all over the
yes,
place without touching
but
anything, then I'm not so into that.
not at all.
um, so I just think it's interesting today because like you got hip hop bands that come on stage with live musicians. You know, you
Yes,
have
or
some rappers that actually have guitar players and drummers.
the Beastie
And
Boys had a DJ in the band, and he was
yeah, just
awesome
yeah,
putting that
Kendrick
in
Lamar,
the middle.
like Kendrick Lamar did a whole tour with a full band, you know, and I think that was amazing because then if you kind of like this idea, like a lot of rap is kind of like Dylan esque, you know, like Dylan. Like I think rap is kind of focused on the words, like in the
Yeah,
way that like a Dylan or a Springsteen or any of the classic singer songwriters, there's a lot of depth in what they say it lyrically. And then if you can actually have a really good band, like when Bob Dylan had the band behind him, you know,
yeah,
the famous band, and they were just these amazing musicians, and he would come out with all this crazy lyrical depth, and then have Robbie Robertson and Danko and all those guys like playing like
yeah,
amazing level, and then him being able to do his poetry. I think those like the Rolling Thunder tour in the '70s was like an amazing thing to see like
yeah.
a lyricist like a Dylan with musicians at the level of the
And
band. That to me is like you know like watching the Grateful Dead.
yes, Dylan always have great bands until today.
So do you ever like do are you just a total one person operation or do you actually ever collaborate with other musicians? Like if you go to play live, is it just you or do you actually bring other people?
When I played live, I played with bands, with rock bands, always.
Like a full band with the drummer and bass player and everybody.
Trio. Sometimes I sang and play the guitar, or sometimes the bass, or sometimes only the guitar. I didn't play electronic things live
Oh, you just
yet.
play like traditional rock type of music. You didn't play like electronic. So when you do the electronic, is that just for like you just produce it, but you don't actually you haven't performed like that. You haven't performed like an electronic group yet.
Yet, yes, because it's hard to make a set that you're comfortable
Hmm.
with a doubleless thing, and to program it and be sure that it will not fail.
Yeah, yeah. That's
But
kind of why like I think what I came up with is letting my analog synths kind of talk for me.
yeah,
I think what I found my solution is I use so many analog synths. I have like each of them have their own analog sequencers, and I just let them kind of be the members of the band. and I kind of let go, trying to control it to be exactly what I originally wrote, but to kind of be in the ballpark of what I wrote. So if I go do something live, I just let all my modulars kind of speak for me, and
And
then I just don't
you
have to
have to
stress about it.
you have to synchronize them with the clock or something.
Yeah, yeah. I have multiple modes like synchronized through advanced clocks. So the CVs are all linking together. And then sometimes I have LFOs actually running the timing. So I find like if you use an LFO to run your timing, you can kind of like, okay, I'm gonna have this square wave run this timing, right? Or I can even have an oscillator kick off a sequence. And I've got like an analog sampler from Make Noise called a Morphogene, and I can actually take that pattern because it's a CV sampler, so it can take the pattern from the sample and use that to trigger a drum machine and use
Yeah,
that to trigger like an oscillator or trigger. So I like to do a lot of CV stuff, kind of like the what Keith Emerson was a big hero of mine, and I like the old kind of '70s prog rock programming, and I go and do a lot of analog CV sequencing, which then is kind of rock solid because it's not going to fail, right? And
yeah.
it will always give you something. Now it might not be exactly what you originally wrote, but it will be
But
something
it's
that people it will
consistent.
be. Yeah, it's consistent within a certain range, right? And so and if you just as a musician, I kind of think of it like jazz. I'm into bands like Sun Ra, Coltrane, and Miles, and I kind of freeform fusion it. And if you just go out there and say, "Well, I'm gonna kind of do it like a fusion guy," then you can do it. If you
Yeah,
use that type of gear, you can use it, and you can be consistent in your sound. You might sound a little different every day, but you can be consistent compared to the digital stuff. That's what I find. But
yeah. That's a problem nowadays. It's harder
yeah,
than before.
yeah. I mean, the digital stuff. The
More
other
complicated.
problem is you have so many choices, right?
Yeah,
With the digital stuff that you kind of start going down a road where you have like this wall of sound and you got so much going on, like you have to decide what you're going to take out.
yeah.
Because I think a lot of times, like I like if I listen to Prince, right, and I listen like Dirty Mind. Dirty Mind is like a demo. It doesn't have a lot of layers. And if you listen to some of the best Prince stuff, he actually took stuff out of the mix. If I have a lot of bootlegs of Prince stuff, and a lot of his stuff, he would have like 16, 24 tracks full of stuff, right? And then when he put it out, he'd drop it down to like 8 or drop it down to like
minimal.
he'd pull the tracks out. He'd get rid of the bass line, he'd get rid of the synth lines, he'd make it more simple. And what I found is like the more simple you make it, the better it is. Like if you sometimes lay too many layers
Yeah,
like over complicate it.
I
I
agree.
think it's
Yeah,
like the quiet space between the notes sometimes is like a good thing.
I like Nils Fram. Do you know it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and he take the Wurlitzer. He had
Oh,
an
Willitzer, yeah, is
acoustic
awesome.
piano. I don't know if he used Jupiter or Juno or
You probably
that
106 or an
other
8 or an
thing,
8.
and tape chorus, and he's really amazing live. Uh, and he can work to play along with all those things.
Yeah, it's just something about it. If you have like a Wurlitzer or you have a Jupiter or a 106 or even like a Prophet 5 or Prophet 10, um, those synths, like if you're a musician, like if you're a keyboard player and you got one of those, you can integrate yourself into anything, right? With those
Yeah,
boards, you can sound like brilliant, and you can just like enhance like the mix just because you kind of just feel it. Like I think I like any keyboard player, you kind of there to just kind of enhance the mix because they're like I've been in bands like we're mostly guitar bands and then they want a keyboard player. And then they say, well, we want to kind of sound like Pink Floyd, or we want to sound like the Doors, or they want to, they because they have an idea what they wanted, or we
yeah,
want to sound like Funkadelic, we want to sound like Bernie Worrell. It's like do something like Bernie Worrell, And I'm like, okay,
A,
you know,
a Hammond or
yeah,
a
Hammond,
Rhodes or
yeah, a Wurlitzer, a Hammond, like a Yamaha piano. Try to do something like Billy Joel, or try to do something like Elton John, like because your keyboard players, oh, do like an Elton John, like, and I'm okay.
okay.
It's like because that's what people know. It's like they're trying to tell you what they want, and it's,
An indication.
yeah. It's like I want a Pink Floyd feel, and I'm like, I like that. I like that because that's kind of atmospheric. So you can like, oh, I can go do something kind of
More
crazy.
fast, fast
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. It's more like atmospheric. If you start thinking about atmospheric synthesizers in the '70s, the stuff that like Yes would do like an 18-minute song,
Rick
like
Wakeman.
yeah, Rick Wakeman be doing these like 18-minute, 20-minute songs, and he just like on all these boards, just doing all this interesting stuff.
Yes,
And what I liked about the progressive music is like the key changes, the fact that they do the rhythmic changes, like the polyrhythms. Like they could do anything. You could do something funky, you could do something classical, you could do something jazz, you could do something rock, and that's why I like the idea of like expansive sound means that I could do something country, I could do something funk, I could do something
yeah,
hip hop. I don't have to be stuck into
versatile.
one zone.
And Pink Floyd started in Dark Side of the Moon with I don't know if it's an ARP.
Or it might be
Take
an
the
EMC3. It might be one of the EMC3s, or it might be an ARP.
yeah,
Because they used to
yeah,
use the EMC3, which is like a really like hard to find synth now. It's like a really strange synth. But yeah, the ECM3 they use the ARPs 2500s and the 2600s. Um, but yeah, I used to. I was watching a documentary, and they were all playing. All the members of the bands were playing with like EMC3s, and they were all in the studio, and they were all on the board, right? And they were saying they're editing their parts on the board, like the drummer's going on the board and editing his parts, you know, and then like Dave Gilmore is on the board, like he's like I want to push this
mix
guitar up.
yourself.
Yeah, they were all in the studio being like recording engineers, and they were all like on the board, like touching their individual like lines on the board. And I think that's kind of cool that they were so involved
Yeah,
in trying to craft their sound. I think as a musician, it's kind of important if you have the mind, like I think like when you have your music, you have a vision for the way you want it to sound, right? So if you get a producer, some people kind of get intimidated by producers, right? And producers tend to
yeah.
want to put you into their sound, right? So they have a sound, and they say, "Well, I'm making all this money, and all my guys get in the top 10," but then they want to turn you into what they do. And I like the producer that takes you and enhances your sound. I think the
I
producer
think
that can take your sound and make it better is
before
what I.
there were more place to experiment and sell albums too, because Dark Side of the Moon is one of the best sellers of all time, and it's pretty experimental. I don't think nowadays we can do something like that and sell albums.
I
Uh,
think it's a matter of getting the kids to be more. I think the problem is Dark Side of the Moon. Like the generation that listened to that was willing to listen to the whole record, right? So
yeah,
they would go to the basement and put the vinyl on and listen to the whole thing. The attention span of the music fan today is a problem because I don't know if Pink Floyd put something out like that again. People would just hit listen to one song. And the problem with the bands like that is like that project is meant to be listened to like the whole thing,
no more
right?
concept album.
Yeah, it's hard to get. Well, the weird thing is hip hop has people listening to entire projects. Guys like Tyler, the Creator, and Kendrick Lamar, they can get their fans to listen to the whole record. The rock genre, it's changed where people don't do that as much. All the popular music is just based on like 1950s like singles. Everybody's into these playlist singles, But it's interesting that the hip hop world does have a lot of mixtapes, a lot of concept albums that people are willing to listen like rock. So to me, that there is a certain audience that's willing to listen to a project. Because if you listen to anything Tyler the Creator has created, he's created multiple concept albums and people listen to the whole thing. And so
yeah,
and Kendrick Lamar is the same way. So and even like Kanye West, people would listen to the whole project. Um, and so I think the fan is there. I think that the musicians, we just have to tap into that. There is an audience that's willing to hear something longer, but we're being told, oh, they aren't. But it's not true. I think there are people who would listen to things that are longer. It's just the marketing
yes.
people don't want to sell
You
it.
can have to target that people.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I like multiple genres. So I'll listen to hip hop. I'll listen to country. I'll listen to Johnny Cash. I'll listen to jazz. I'll listen to
Me too.
EDM. And so there's like thinking that the audience is only an EDM fan. I think it's a mistake. I think when people just think that their audience is just so narrow, they're making a bad decision. Because I think what the thing about the '70s is you had people crossing. You had the R&B audience listening to pop music like James Taylor. We had people who were listening to James Taylor listening to Funkadelic. People listening to Led Zeppelin. People were crossing lines, and now people are like, "Oh, it's only I'm trance and I'm bass." This they're so segmented,
In
and they
boxes.
don't. Yeah, they're in the boxes, and I think that's the mistake. It's like if people are willing to cross, if you
Yes,
give
but
them the chance.
no, everyone releases singles and singles.
Yeah, well, the
Like,
Spotify is just so it's cool, but it's also a problem in that because everybody's trying to get on a playlist and it's only single
yeah,
focus that it's losing the cohesiveness of an artist to me is like
yeah,
in that Spotify world, you don't get to listen to the breadth of somebody's work, right? So if you get a new artist, all you get is their hit. You don't, and the thing is, a lot of times I listen to an old record, right? And it's the non-singles. It's the songs that aren't singles that tell you about that artist, right? So if you listen to their full project, it's the songs that didn't get on the radio, the deeper tracks that kind of tell you who they are, right? And if
totally.
you all
Yeah,
you get is the surface track, then you don't even know the depth of that artist, you know.
yeah.
So
Um,
I think that's it. I think it's just the fans need to just like be willing to go a little deeper.
but yes, I like the concept albums from the 70s that you can find, and they maybe wasn't thinking of how many albums will I sell. And
No, it is. They just wanted to make something that meant something. Like
yeah,
you think about Tommy and Quadrophenia and all the Pink Floyd albums.
the world,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
they just wanted to say something. If they out there, Roger Waters is trying to really make these like mini plays, like sound movies. And Pink
yeah,
Floyd albums are like these mini like movies in your head, like sound vision, and you can imagine, the story of the wall, or wish you were
yeah.
here.
Even then, with the pros and cons of his kitchen, and I'm used to the radio chaos, and his solo career is also with concept albums.
Yeah, yeah. Roger just does continues to do concept records. Even Pete Townsend from the Who, he did multiple concepts after he left, after he wasn't in the Who, and then when the Who come back, they still do it. Um, and it just to me is like there are the genres. I have talked to people. There are a lot of indie artists that have been inspired by these people. And in the last year, I've talked to a bunch of artists, and there's a lot of them are doing like concepts, which is kind of cool to me because in the kind of underground world that I interview, a lot of musicians are saying like I'm gonna do that, whether the audience is gonna be there like for like it would be for a top 10 signal, they're still putting out work. So the work is being created, whether or not it's being pushed by the powers that be. But I try to push it through the podcast. so so
Very good.
I just I'm just hoping I try to push all these independent emerging artists like
I think
yourself.
the difference today is that still there are the majors companies,
Yeah, the
but
majors. Yeah,
now you have another channels to express. I think 20 years before there was no way to show your thing here in Argentina, and you in New York. I
yeah. I think
had to
this is the
mail
power.
the tape to you.
Yeah, I
I
mean
think
this is the power. Yeah, go ahead.
no that you can show your music despite that it maybe it will not be in the radio or in TV or the great channels, but you can show
Well,
it
I think it's
anyway.
like places like Instagram, because I found you on Instagram and you found me on Instagram. Is like most of my interviews are with international artists. I've interviewed artists, in Italy, in London, in Korea, in Japan, Netherlands, Norway, Iceland, Latvia. I mean, because the cool thing about the net is suddenly I'm not limited to only talking to U.S. artists. I'm not limited just to talking to people on the West Coast or the East Coast. I get to talk to people all over the world, and I think that is the benefit. Um, and because of these channels, because now this is going on to Spotify, this is on YouTube, this is on Twitch, this is on Facebook. These are the alternative places
Yeah,
where music fans that don't want to just get bombarded with the top 20, they're more into I want to know what's going on in music, so they're willing to listen to the stuff on SoundCloud. They're willing to go through YouTube and look for artists, or they're on Instagram, which I think is a fantastic platform, and they get to hear like a 1 minute clip from an artist, right? And then they go, oh, that's cool, and then they hit your link, and then they start listening to you, and
yeah,
that is something we couldn't do before because,
and
like you
maybe
said,
because that kind of marketing center way of the major works, and and the the top in the list, maybe they don't have any experimentation or deeper lyrics, or I don't know. I like to hear amateur music. Sometimes it's not good developed in terms of technical terms, but they offer other human expression. I don't know. Maybe I find amateur people that are really good in
yeah,
what they
I think
do.
it's like the punk movement, right? Because back in the '70s, right, you had like you had like Led Zeppelin, you had the big bands, right? There are
The
professional bands.
progressive,
Yeah, like Journey and Styx and all these bands, right? They were professional musicians. And then what happened is like you get the punk rockers out of London, like the Clash and the Sex Pistols, start saying, "Hey, I don't have to have perfect pitch. I don't have to be in tune. I don't have to have the best voice.
yeah,
I don't have to have the tightest chord arrangements." But the Clash, right, when they come out, I mean, that stuff is fantastic. And it's not as
flesh.
perfect as Pink Floyd, right? It's not as perfect as the Beatles, but there's something about the honesty of punk. I think that opened it up for like post punk and new wave and
Blondie.
alternative and grunge.
Yeah,
And sometimes that
yeah.
stuff is
In
like
that
it's not
time,
perfect, but it's honest.
it was everything was symphonic. You had to be a really good musician to play like Genesis.
Yeah.
Uh,
Genesis and
uh,
Yes are like they're all classical trained. They like came out of a out of schools they're told like phenoms, right? But then when you get to like a punk rocker like a Johnny Rotten or Joe Strummer, like they're like the opposite. Like you get the bands like like
yes,
Black Flag,
and
Husker
um,
Du,
people find that refreshing.
Yeah, I think what the people liked about Kurt Cobain because we were coming out of this hair band like Motley Crue and Rat and all these like Poison. Not that that's bad, but they were kind of processed, right? And then Kurt Cobain comes along with this kind of like I'm just wearing my blue jeans and my hair is kind of not washed and I'm just honest. I think what people like about punk and grunge, like the Eddie Vedder and the Soundgarden, was the fact that they came and they were like honest and they weren't trying to like put on like a show. They were kind of talking about stuff that was maybe typically with the grunge and punk is like they're not just talking about I love my girl or my girl left me or like my girl's bad to me. They're talking about like more
The
psychological stuff, right? They're talking
the
about
X
deeper
generation.
yeah, they're talking about all kinds of things that are not like typical pop song topics, which I think is cool because then they're coming out and the machine probably doesn't like that because the machine says that oh you should just do like a song about how your girl left you and you left your girl and whatever that tends to be the what is done and then when somebody comes along and does something different they're like oh why did that work
This is new.
because Kurt Cobain he wasn't talking about like oh I love my girlfriend that's not what he's talking about.
No, he had problems.
He had problems, but he was able to express his problems in a way that the whole generation identified with it. And the thing that's
Yeah,
interesting is like the A&R people would have said when Nirvana would never make it, right? Like the studio system, and they came out of like Sub Pop, and they were on that Sub Pop scene, that's the indie label,
yeah,
and they were like they could have just stayed there, but they just blew up, and people just saw the
sure.
energy they had and it
Yeah.
wasn't perfect,
Ethan
but it
had
was like, yeah,
Ethan had
it was,
Guns N' Roses as the main number, and they don't put much money in the second record of Nirvana. I
yeah,
was a subsidiary of Giffen,
yeah,
um, and they don't bet in Nirvana in that time.
yeah. And
Uh,
Nirvana blew up, because it's like everybody thought you had to be the
uh,
next Guns N' Roses. Now, Guns N' Roses is like the Stones, they're like a classic hard rock band.
yeah,
They were kind of a surprise because Guns N' Roses got a lot of, they had a lot of classic capability. They kind of remind me of like Zeppelin, remind me of the Stones, remind me of Queen. They weren't like Motley Crue. They weren't like Rat. They weren't like Poison.
but
They actually were more like the classic rockers.
but they spend a lot of money in Use Your Illusion.
Yeah, I mean that's because
That's
Axl
the one.
Rose is a little extreme.
Um, but
Axl Rose Axl Rose is a very extreme artist, and he just
but never mind sell a lot, uh, sold
well,
a
it kind
lot
of shows you don't
with
have
a
to spend. I don't think you have to spend the money, but there was this kind of thinking in the '70s, right? That you had to spend like $1 million, like to do like a Fleetwood Mac rumors, right? That you got to go off somewhere and spend a lot of money to do something because this was the age of the professional musician. Stevie Wonder for like songs in the key of life, he got like $1 million advance. It took him like 3 years to put it together, and he spent like almost the whole $1 million putting the album together. Now that album was kind of worth the $1 million because if you listen to songs in the key of life, it's like very advanced. There's a lot of interesting things, but like but some bands, if they spend like $1 million on something, it's like, well, I don't know if that was worth it.
lose
But
money.
He just blew the money. but but
Where's
I,
the money?
but I don't think you have to spend money because there's lots of bands that spent like 3 weeks in the studio, didn't have any
But
budget, and
they
they
didn't
create
sing
something amazing.
Nirvana will do it. I think the difference between they spent and they earned later with Nevermind was incredible. The
Well, I think it's
ratio.
like yeah, it's the punk aesthetic because in a punk aesthetic, you don't need to spend money. Like that's the thing. Is like if you're coming with a mindset of a Johnny Rotten or a Joe Strummer or like an Eddie Vedder or a Kurt Cobain, you don't like you're like anti money. Like their whole idea is like I'm gonna just do something because I feel like it, right? I'm gonna do it because I feel it. I don't care about the money. All I want to do is I want to have my voice. I don't want to do it the way I want. Right? It's a punk aesthetic. It's a punk attitude, and so sometimes that's so honest that it resonates with the audience, and
Yeah,
you don't have to sugarcoat it. You don't gotta spend all this money and overproduce it. You know,
totally.
and I think I'm a big fan of taking a punk aesthetic and whether or not you're into jazz or classical, but having that kind of drive to do
Honesty.
something. Yeah, like to me, it's like that. It goes a long way in anything. Like you can take that idea and use it for every genre. You know.
Yes, it's always the people who the vast majority of people who lends to what what the artist will do, or a kind of natural selection of if the public is not prepared or ready to some kind of expression, it won't be possible.
Yeah, it's
And
true. You think about like the Velvet Underground, right? Like Lou Reed, when he first came on the scene, like the only people listening to the Velvets were other artists. um, but like then 20, 30 years later, Lou Reed suddenly got all his recognition. Like during the time he wrote the Velvet Underground stuff, right? Nobody bought it. But
with
by the time he was in his
with
mid 40s and 50s,
a lot,
everybody knew his stuff. You know, people knew the music. It sold way more records than it did. So sometimes something is not in its time, right?
totally.
And then later it becomes, oh wow, that everybody knows the Velvets today are like foundational
But
to like alternative music, indie music, grunge is like that. He's like the father of that stuff,
yes, but
Lou Reed. But
it
during the
wasn't
time,
big in.
yeah, I mean, people didn't buy it. And so, but that's why I try to tell when you think about these record companies, like people didn't buy Lou Reed, so maybe you ought to stop skipping over all the Lou Reeds that you are missing. you know, just
Yes, you
trying
have
to
to
get the
wait.
yeah, just getting the next Beyonce and the next weekend. That the record company has a tendency to just want to replicate what's in the top 10
Yeah,
and to make 10 copies or 100 copies of the same guys or the same women and just
and,
saturate the market with the same sound.
until people get tired of it.
Yeah, so you got to break through. And then what happens is now we got TikTok, we got Reels, we got YouTube. And in the young people, they find somebody that's doing something interesting. And then suddenly they get blow up. I mean, that's what happened with Tyler the Creator. He was on YouTube doing mixtapes, and then suddenly they blew up. It's like a lot of times in hip hop, it's like the mumble rappers on SoundCloud. They suddenly blow up because the
Yeah,
people in those audiences say that's killer. Like in
yes,
the record companies didn't know anything about it. It just it's natural like the selection. The people are saying I want something different, and then it
people
comes up.
rules.
Yeah, I think that's the way it goes. It's like I think the more you can go on to TikTok and Instagram and Reels and any of these new forms and get like a blow up that way, then you kind of can come up in on your own terms, and not have to have people telling you what to do.
Totally.
But I think we've gone like an hour. It's been really interesting. I was really happy that you came on the show. I think this will be out there for everybody to hear still on Twitch and YouTube and Facebook. And within an hour, this will be on Spotify as a video podcast. And so
Video,
we will
the
send
first
you that
video
link.
in Spotify.
Yeah, it's video. We're in the program. They have video podcast on Spotify. So I will send you the link. And if
I
you're
want
on
to see
Spotify,
that.
yeah, that's very useful. It'll help you out, because I think that's where everybody listens. And this is the one place where we're able to do something longer than 5 minutes. And so the people will
Right.
be able to get this and see you on that podcast on Spotify, which is really cool because this is like the one place that podcasting was one of the things I liked before I go is the fact that we can go long in a world where things are only supposed to be 2 and 3 minutes. We can
Yeah,
go and do something for like an
it's
hour.
10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that is gives people a little. There are people that like it because we're at about 35,000 listens since we've been out there. We get about sometimes 1,000 to 2,000 listens per episode, and we're starting to come up, and we're happy that you were on the show, and we're going to keep on doing this. Once you have another project, if you ever want to come on the show and talk about it, let us
Oh,
know, and we love to have people come on the show multiple times.
well, thank you for asking me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Everybody go and check out the link that's on Google. You can, if you use that link, you can get all the work for Cabotage KSM, and we encourage you to go out everywhere you find the music, subscribe to it, like it, favorite it, playlist it. Make sure you do that. Make sure you always subscribe to an artist. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. Subscribe to him on Instagram. Because people forget that that's what we need to do today. So if you like an artist, always make sure you do that. Download, like, subscribe. That's the general thing that you should do. Thank you very much for being on the
Okay.
show, and we'll talk to you
Until the
later.
next.